It's the live stream, everyone. If you're watching the live stream, we will be starting in about 9 minutes, just over that. If you're watching on the replay, we'll start whenever you want to start because you could just fast forward a little bit and start that up. If you are watching live on the YouTube side, there is a chat at professormesser.com/live, which I will put into my chat if I can spell my name properly. And that's that there, and that's this here. And we'll change the promo bar on the website. See, I already had it ready to go. Had it ready to go before I connected live. And there, that's updated. Socrativ's there. Some folks are already in. Welcome. Welcome. My keynote needs to be up and running. Let's make sure folks are coming into the live stream. And there is. Everybody should show up here in about 4 minutes. If anyone is able to do so. Let's see what else we got to get ready. I've got the presentation ready to go. We've got the keynote. Let's do keynote. Are we starting? We're looking. We're playing. Boom. Oh, is it time already? Yes, it is time already. I can't believe it. Oh, yes. And I don't think about anything else other than this right now. We will focus on Network Plus today, not on distractions. Let's do a check of cameras. Hi. How you doing? Good to see you. Thanks for coming. We've got this. We've got that. My head's in here. It's not cut off too badly. Very good. Okay. It works. It's alive. What do I think about the election? I think it's over. That's what I think of it. And that's about all I'll worry about today. One thing you'll notice on the site is we don't do politics. We keep it very Thanksgiving Day meal-ish. We keep it very elevator ride-ish. How about that weather? I think it's going to rain. And that's the way it goes. There's plenty of other sites people can go to talk politics. And I think they should because it's just too divisive on a site that deals with technical things. We're trying to get a job or get a better job. We'll let the politics all worry about itself somewhere else. Which is a challenge to me because I have a very, like anyone else, I have an opinion politically about everything. But this is neither the time or the place for it. What else do I need to get ready? I need to make sure the Twitter is up and running. Twitter. It should come out automatically in 45 seconds. So we'll see that. The outline of what we will go over today. It's very similar to the outline of what we have gone over for every other study group we've done, which is I'll do questions and you do answers. And there you go. There is all Network Plus is the topic for today. That's the outline. It's all Network Plus. And now I need to turn off myself here and make myself invisible. Except I can't see if I'm invisible or not. There we go. Now I'm invisible. You can't see me. I'm invisible. I'm not really here. Okay. Oh, let's see if the tweet went out. And poor Twitter, it is just overloaded. There it is. Went out, which means Facebook went out as well, which means Google Plus went out. So everybody should be joining. Let's check in and see if people are joining, shall we? Because I can look at those things. The analytics. Yeah, there you folks are. Welcome. Whoa, okay. There's quite a few. There's quite a few people here. I'm always surprised. I don't know why. I set up a study group. I send you an email. I get online. We do all the live stuff. And then for some reason, I'm surprised when people actually show up. I don't know why. It's just surprising. Oh, we have 4 minutes. 4 minutes, Mr. Sinatra. I could use some singers, Saving Grace, Cinnamon, Serious Cinnamon. It's too many S's. Singers, Saving Grace, Serious Cinnamon. It's soothing throat spray. It really doesn't taste like that great. Socrative has a different UI. It's exactly the same UI it's always had. Well, not always had. They changed it about a year ago. I haven't noticed anything different. This is indeed the right chat for the study group. The live event chat, since I am a live event, that should work perfect. If you are watching on the YouTube, you can flip over to professormesser.com/live, where there's a chat. You'll notice on YouTube there is no chat because YouTube is just not a great place for chat. The link to the quiz. The link to the quiz is pop quiz, professormesser.com/pop quiz. Or you mean the quiz today, which is Socrative, which is the other one I have here. Where's my Socrative page? There it is. It's the next page. It's this one, where you can follow along at Socrative.com. Room name, Professor Messer. Spell it right. PROFESSORMESSER. You caught that, didn't you? It's the name that's at the top of the site. And I did these questions over the weekend, so I don't remember what they are. And I did not look over them. It was a little bit hectic because I, like many people here in the United States last night, stayed up late. I don't know why I scheduled a live event after something that I knew would go until the wee hours of the morning. What was I thinking? They're also doing quite a bit of construction. Let's see if what's happening on birdfeeder.live right now, which is the view outside my window, out in the yard, out in the backyard, the live stream of the bird feeder, if it's up and running. I imagine it still is. I checked it this morning. It was. Well, there's the old one. It usually has about 30 seconds of a thing that it does going back overnight, and then we should get the live stuff. Oh, extremely poor planning. No question. No question. Any red herring? Isn't that a fish? Pretty sure. There's the live stream. See, it's so much nicer. Anybody see the live stream? There it is. And they're not doing construction at next door. They're building a house next door, so it's a little loud at times. Not really sunny out today. We do have cardinals that do visit. That is a red bird that does visit, although it's quiet right now. So very calming before you can hear the water running. See, it's now we're in a zen moment. See, it's much nicer now. We've got, yeah, there's usually plenty of cardinals. In fact, on birdfeeder.com, I think I have a cardinal, northern cardinal post where I do have a video up that shows some of the cardinals that have come through. Here's the picture of it. There it is. Can't really see it very well, but there's some cardinals. There's one. Hi, how you doing? In my face. Today's coffee cup brought to you by the good folks at Pete's. Major Dickinson today. Major Dickinson is in the cup. All right. Is it time, though? It is time. So we can do this. We can get this started and do this thing. What is the terminal velocity of that unladen cardinal? It's a good question. One maybe we'll figure out right now. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the November 2016 Professor Messer Network Plus Study Group. This is the Network Plus version of my study groups. Last week we did one with A+. Next week we're doing one with Security Plus. And then I actually have 2 weeks off this month. I'm very much looking forward to it. Can you tell? But we're in November of 2016. If you're watching this live, make sure you follow along on the Professor Messer website at professormesser.com/live, because there is a live chat right there that I am watching. So if you are watching this live over on the YouTube site, you might want to flip over to professormesser.com/live. And I have other links there that will get you to things that might help you while we are going through these questions today. Should be pretty interesting because I'm going to ask you questions and you're going to answer them. Hopefully I have the questions ready to go. We'll find out in just a moment. I want to thank everyone for joining us. I wouldn't be able to do this without your ongoing support throughout the rest of the month. It's so nice for you to join us for this Q&A. For those of you that are familiar with my Network Plus course, every video, every minute of every video is available to watch for free online. Some people like an offline version. You can find out more about that at professormesser.com/getnetplus. And of course, you've got links to Twitter and YouTube and Instagram. Just type in professormesser.com/ the name of the thing you're hoping to find. And maybe I will be able to give you that as well. There's also, by the way, don't forget that voucher discounts are available on the website at professormesser.com/vouchers. We do these study groups every month. There's also a notification for these. You can sign up and get on an email list that just tells you when those are happening. And if you're ever wondering when the next study group will be, you can always go to professormesser.com/calendar. I need to update the ones for next month, as a matter of fact. If you are interested in that offline version of my course, you can find out more about it at professormesser.com/getnetplus, Plus. And it has 1080p video. There is closed captioning on all of my videos. There's MP3 files, versions of the videos, so you can easily put it on a mobile device and listen while you're driving. And of course, my course notes come with this as well. We'll talk about my course notes later on. Some of you have said you wanted more Q&A. And so for Network Plus, I do have some Q&A out at professormesser.com/pop quiz. And I've got some Network Plus questions there that you can go through, and I'm always adding some new ones. They are the questions that I had created for the study groups, and instead of archiving them as part of the videos, I also will put them into this list here. So you can, of course, watch the replays of every study group I do, or you can, of course, go right to the questions and try them out yourself. Well, today, we're going to do this live. I'm going to ask you a question live, and you're going to answer the question live, and we're going to see what you said for the answer. It's an amazing service called Socrative. So if you go out to www.socrative.com and click the student login, you will see a link there to put in a room name. And there's the room name, Professor Messer, PROFESSOR There's also apps you can get for your mobile device. If you don't want to pop open a new browser window and do that, you can easily go to the app store of your choice, depending on what device you have, and download the Socrative Student app. I'll, of course, give you an update on this as we go along. If you get to this point where you're in Socrative, you're in a room, you will see a question like this that says, how long have you been studying for your Network Plus certification? And you'll be able to choose from a number of different options. Those options are less than 3 months, 3 to 6 months, 6 to 9 months, 9 months to a year, over a year, or you already have your Network Plus certification. This may be useful for the 14 or 15% that are watching that already have their Network Plus certification. You can get continuing education unit credit for watching this live event. You can also get it for watching the replay. So whether you're watching it after the fact or you're watching it right now, I will send you a CEU, and I'll tell you later on in the presentation in this first hour how to get or at least submit your request for that CEU. And then I'll be able to make it available to you. The latest Network Plus version, the latest Network Plus exam is called the N10006. So make sure that if you have any study materials, that is the version of the exam that those study materials are associated with. Don't use N10005, don't use N10004 or anything else. It needs to be N10006. This was an exam that was released in February 2015, so it's been out, well over a year now. We're coming up on 2 years. Usually these things get updated about every 3 years. So you've got plenty of time to study if you're watching this live in November of 2016. Always check the CompTIA website. They will tell you when an exam is coming up for renewal. And they usually, when they release a new version, they still allow you to take the old version of the exam. So there's even an overlap after you do that. Makes it very easy to go through those things. So make sure also you have the objectives. You can download those from the CompTIA website. Well, let's jump into the question, shall we? That's enough of me talking about things. You'll notice that when you register for my notification, I will send you an email notification when we are having these events. And you'll notice when that happens that I ask you during the registration, is there a question you would like me to go through or a particular topic that interests you? And one of the number one topics is the OSI model. So I have asked an OSI model as one of my first questions today for the study group. And the question is, at which OSI layer does a switch operate? Now, one important thing, if you're in the chat, do not put anything in the chat that describes the answer. You want to have the answers all on Socrative.com. Go to Socrative.com, click the student login, and go to room name Professor Messer. Make sure that you do that. So you can, of course, go to room name PROFESSORMESSER. And if you do that, you will see a list of potential answers. I have answers here, in this case, OSI layers 1 through 7. I certainly just gave you all of them. So it's got to be one of these. You can't get away from this one. This is definitely not a trick question because it's got to be one of these layers that's in there. If you think you happen to know what it is, you can, of course, go out there. Of course, don't Google it. Don't try to figure it out based on something online. You want to sit in front of this as if you are taking the exam for the first time. You want to jump into this and try to figure it out on your own. This is a question that actually came up in the chat as well. You may be aware that this chat that you're in live is one that is also available on my website 24/7. So someone came into the chat. We were talking about switches and the layers that switches operate in the OSI model. And for some reason, there was some confusion about it. So I thought, well, let's ask the question, and then we'll figure out maybe where the confusion happens to be. See what happens with those. Let's see what we are able to do with these pieces. Also, it's important on your in the chat, and of course, usual when you take the Network Plus exam, you sign an agreement, a candidate agreement that says you won't discuss any of the details of that exam. So make sure you don't put any of those details into the chat either. So let's see how we did with this. What OSI layer does a switch operate? How do we do? Let's click the button. Well, we have one clear winner, 79%, but is that the right answer? And you can see we're sort of scattered around that layer 2. We even have some folks that say layer 7, 2% said layer 7, 4% said layer 6, nobody said layer 5. What is it with layer 5? You don't like layer 5? 2% said layer 4, 5% said layer 1, 8, layer 3. So really not even double digits. We are at 79% that said, oh, it's got to be layer 2 with this particular piece. The OSI layer, I think, and of course the TCP/IP model, both the OSI and the TCP/IP models themselves are not a real thing. They're not a tangible technical thing. They're a model. They're something you use to help tell you where the traffic is going, but it's not something that you can really focus or put a very specific value on some of these things because it's something that's trying to guide us and give us an idea of how the data is operating. The OSI model layer 2 is called the data link layer. And that's really, when we're focusing on all of those things, that's really useful to know. Whenever you start going through any OSI model questions, you need to absolutely go through and understand what operates at what layer. And I think one of the things I often recommend to people is download Wireshark, take some packet captures, just look through a single packet capture. And I do this in my videos, you'll notice. So in the single packet capture, I always go through and show you, here's what's happening with each part of the packet and what OSI layer it's associated with. And it's so well broken out in the packet capture, in the decode, that it's so easy to see what's going on with those things. So when we're talking about OSI layer 2, we're talking about communication at a MAC address level. So there's really no IP addresses that we're dealing with at this level. We're one layer below that. IP addresses obviously at layer 3. This is also something where if it is a fundamental layer 2 protocol that's communicating using these physical addresses, we often call these data link control addresses, DLC addresses. This is one where when we start seeing this type of communication, we know that it's operating at layer 2. In Ethernet, it's easy to see this. In Ethernet, we're so accustomed to seeing MAC addresses. If you're on a wide area network link, you're not on Ethernet anymore, usually. With wide area network, with traditional wide area network, it's no longer Ethernet. There are a number of wide area network technologies today where you are simply plugging in an Ethernet connection, and who knows what's happening out in that nebulous cloud that's out there. But in the traditional T1, T3, SDLC, HDLC type wide area network communication, you don't have MAC addresses anymore. You have more of a DCE and a DTE. One on each side of that communication, and you're really looking at MAC addresses differently. Frame Relay has its own DLC address, for instance. They call them DLCIs for Frame Relay. So you never know what you may be running into at that layer, but it's all layer 2. It's the physical address layer is layer 2. Sometimes you'll hear it referred to as the switching layer because switches determine where traffic is going based on this physical address, based on the MAC address. Switches have no idea what IP address is assigned to your device. Switches don't care. Switches only operate at layer 2. Now, some of you will argue with me about this thing called a layer 3 switch. That's not a switch, that's a router. At least part of it's a router. The part doing layer 3 is a router. The part doing layer 2 is a switch. They are not one thing. They are two separate things that may exist in a single chassis. We're talking about the switching component of this. A layer 3 switch is really two devices working independently within the same box. I'm talking very specifically about the layer 2 piece. The argument or the conversation that we were having in the chat is that some people felt that the switch was layer 1. It was the physical layer. And the argument was that, well, everything has to pass through a physical medium, so it must be the physical layer. But if you take that and extrapolate it further, wouldn't everything be at layer 1? Wouldn't your computer be at layer 1? Wouldn't your browser be at layer 1? So you really have to take the model and figure out where those different components fit in the model. It's not that they happen to use any part of that layer, it's where they happen to operate. And that's the important consideration. And one of my videos on the OSI model not only shows the layers, but it shows how those layers are used in what I call the real world. I hate that term, but that's the way I described it. That shows here's where we can watch a conversation occur across the network and where each point of that conversation hits in the OSI model. And if you have confusions about the OSI model, that might be a good place to go. So if we look at the answers on this first question, I think you all did very good. 78% said layer 2. I usually shoot to try to make these questions 50% of you getting right. So you folks have been working very hard on these questions if you're able to hit 78% with your OSI model. This is a good way to start, I think, for this particular set of questions on the study group today. So let's jump to the next question. Let's do another one. Which of the following would be the best choice for converting from DC to AC power? DC to AC powers. This is something you do very often in the world of networking and the networking equipment and computing equipment in general. So which of the following would be the best choice? Which of the following means it must have some options there. So one of the things is power inverter, UPS, power supply suppressor, or power converter. So that's something to consider in here as well. Which is the best choice for converting from DC to AC power? Power inverter, UPS, power supply suppressor, and power converter. In the chat room, some people are even saying, he didn't say layer 3 switch, so you have to assume it's layer 2 switch. There's no such thing as a layer 3 switch. Maybe it's a layer 2 router. That doesn't make sense either, does it? There's switching and there's routing. Layer 3 switch is a marketing term. It's one come up to somebody just created out of thin air. It doesn't exist in reality. A switch is switching, a router is routing. Sometimes you can do both of those in the same device. Sometimes you can do application identification in the same device. Does that mean it's a layer 7 switch? No. So don't get wrapped up in all of the weird terms that we use, especially with marketing. If you're dealing with things on the network plus exam, you're dealing with switching, you're dealing with routing, and you need to keep those things very different. Once you understand the fundamentals of routing and the fundamentals of switching, then you can start using those terms together and understanding the differences and how those blend together into that weird product that companies have created called a layer 3 switch. But it's important as you're learning these things not to even know that that type of nonsense exists out there. So let's talk about AC power and DC power and how we would convert from any of those and working through that. It's kind of one of the challenges we do whenever we're trying to figure out the details of these pieces. And you will run into this very often because your computing equipment and your networking equipment, your routers, your switches, your firewalls, they all use different types of power and have different power requirements. In some data centers, all of your equipment uses AC power. In other data centers, all of the equipment uses DC power. And you often have to decide which component you are purchasing to be able to get the right thing. So it's important to understand these differences as we're going through this and knowing what these different components can do. It will be incredibly important. If you buy a switch and it's got the wrong power, now you've got a big switch in your data center that you're not able to plug in and do anything with. You don't want to be in that position. So let's see how we did with this. We've got 52%, 51%, half of us said power inverter, 23% said power converter, said 19% said power supply, 7% said UPS, and nobody said power suppressor. Interestingly enough, I don't know whether that's because you know what a power suppressor is or you're just not even worried about that particular term. Maybe it's one of these things is not like the others, or you're trying to do the ones where you get rid of something you know it can't possibly be, and we'll go to the others and try to make a guess. Well, we need to understand the differences then. The two terms we really need to know about this are using a power converter or a power inverter. They're two terms we almost use interchangeably, but they are very different in what they are. A power converter converts from AC power to DC power. So the power supply that's in your computer or the power brick that you use on your laptop is a power converter. This is the terminology, the nomenclature that we use when we describe these devices. We are converting from something that's coming from an AC power source, which is an alternating current, and we are converting that to a direct current or DC power. When you see somebody talking about an inverter, we're really going the other direction. We have DC power, and we somehow need to create an alternating current from that. You often see this in things like solar panels because the solar panels will create quite a bit of direct current, and you now need to convert that into alternating current so that you can use it in your home. I also have one of these in my car, so I can plug into a DC power. This is a good example of one, this picture here. Let's put the highlight on there. So this picture here, you can plug into the car DC connection that we used to use for lighting our cigarettes. Now we just use it for powering all of our devices in our car, and it's plugging into this inverter, which is giving us just a standard power connection. So we can plug in a charger for a cell phone or a laptop computer, or as long as you have an inverter and you're running in the right specifications that you're not overloading that particular device. So when we talk about converting or inverting, that's the terminology we're thinking about here. Make sure you understand that the converter is AC to DC, making sure that the inverter is the DC to AC. So the question I asked you was specifically on which of the following would be the best choice for converting from DC to AC. So the 52% of you that answered power inverter got that one absolutely right. That hit my 50% mark I was trying for here. Would not be power converter, although I can see why you might think that, but obviously power converter is the reverse of this. It is a DC to AC is our inverter, and our AC to DC is the converter. So that's a little bit something, just a nomenclature, just a terminology that we need to have solid when we're ready to walk into our exam. This is pretty important. Whenever I start looking at the exam objectives, those two things are in the exam objectives. So we need to definitely understand those details and the differences between all of those. An uninterruptible power supply, probably not the best choice for converting from DC to AC, but it does convert. Generally, when it kicks in, it almost always is taking a battery power and converting it to AC, but that is not the best choice. This is an important consideration, by the way, on this exam, is you will have a question that asks you, like this one, which is the best choice for converting between DC and AC? And they're really looking for one specific answer, but it's possible that one of the other answers listed could technically answer this particular question. It could technically be a correct answer. But this wasn't one where we're saying, give me any device that provides DC to AC. It asks the best choice. You'll see this often with questions that ask you for the first thing you would do when troubleshooting. What is the best choice in this particular situation? So you need to go through every single one of these answers and determine what would be the best choice. An uninterruptible power supply is, in many cases, not providing any type of conversion. There are some online and real-time power supplies that do always provide you power through the battery, so it doesn't matter what happens to the main line. There's other UPSs that don't. You're just getting the standard AC power, and they only kick in if there is a power problem. So this would not be the best answer because we have one that always, 100% of the time, converts between DC to AC, and that would be the power inverter. So as you're looking through these answers and you're trying to figure out which of these is really the best, make sure you read those questions very, very carefully for that. So in our case, obviously, power inverter 51%. That would be the best choice. Not all power supplies convert from DC to AC. Some power supplies do the reverse. It depends on what type of power is going through that power supply. That's more of a generic name, so that would not be the best choice for this answer either. The one that is the most descriptive, that really describes what that question is a power converter. Well done with that one. One of the things we always have to end up doing on our networks, especially if you're a network professional, is there's always a layer of security on top of everything we do. So here's a question dealing with more of a security type scenario. And the question is, you need to prevent users from visiting websites associated with online auctions. Which of these would be the best choice for this requirement? Well, that makes me sad. I like visiting websites with online auctions. In fact, I get too involved with websites that have online auctions. But of course, as security professionals, network professionals, we need to be able to allow the right kind of traffic, but prevent the wrong kind of traffic. And the edict has come down. The standard in our organization, the philosophy that we use on our networks, is that people should not visit websites that are associated with online auctions, because people like me would spend too much time there and would not do their work. So would the best choice for this requirement be a WAP? Would it be a firewall? Would it be a packet shaper? Would it be a URL filter? Would it be a load balancer? It's got to be one of those. And this is another question, by the way, where there are multiple answers that could technically solve this particular problem or answer this particular question. But again, we're looking for the best choice for this requirement. It's always a challenge to find the best choice. Maybe you know what it is. No answering in the chat room, of course. You want to go to Socrative.com, go to the student login, click the room name, or type in the room name, which is Professor Messer. Make sure you type it in all with the correct spelling, Professormesser. One of my last full-time jobs, I should say, this is my full-time job now, but one of my previous jobs, previous position, was working in the network security world. And there are so many different ways to implement security on people's networks because there are so many different requirements that people have. There are people that have a philosophy of tightly restricting what people can do in a browser. Other organizations say you can go wherever you'd like. We'll just keep a log of where you go in case we need to use this later. And some organizations don't care at all. Some organizations are more concerned about malware and spyware. Others are concerned about making sure applications are restricted through a centralized filtering device. Just depends on the requirements, and every organization has a little bit different philosophy. And that's why I think we see in the security world, there's so many different ways to implement security. And in many cases, you need to layer these implementations of security. You need to be sure that you're using a layered approach to security so that you can stop as much as possible from coming into your network. So let's see how we did with this particular answer. How do we do? Let's click. Well, we're a little torn, although if we go with the majority, 56%, we can see that URL filter is that 56% of folks that answered, but 35%, well over a third, said a firewall. So we're having a little argument about those two. You can see it drops well off after that. Only 6% said packet shaper, only 4% said WAP. That would be nice. And 0% said load balancer. Well, why not? Why wouldn't you use a load balancer with this? Well, those of you who have done this before are probably very familiar with URL filtering. This is a very common way to restrict what people can see in a browser because it allows or it denies communication through your network, or maybe just logs information going through your network based on the URL that people are visiting. This would be something like you may see it also described as URI. We call these URL filters based on the Uniform Resource Locator, but the actual proper terminology is the Uniform Resource Identifier, the URI. This is sort of like in security or in networking or in this world of technology, we often talk about SSL encryption, but it's really TLS encryption. It's one of those scenarios where we're actually calling it something different than what it really is now. We've changed the terms. It's one of those things we run into. But that's why URL filtering, you'll see I can do URL filtering. It's really URI filtering. But as long as you know that, we're in good shape there. Usually these URL filters will operate as something that will block information based on a very specific URL. But obviously you can't type in every single URL of everything you would ever want to prevent going through your network. There's so many millions and millions and millions of those, you simply can't do it. Fortunately, the organizations that have created these URL filters have bundled all of these URLs that they are constantly categorizing into categories like auctions, hacking, malware, travel, recreation, and you're able to allow or disallow someone going to a very large category of sites, even if you have no idea what the URLs might be inside of those categories. This is something that is a part of security. Obviously, if you're in a browser and you're surfing around the network, that's one way to do it. But there's other ways to visit websites or communicate with other sites that are out there on the internet that may not include URLs. Another challenge with URL filtering is encryption. This used to be the way to get around a URL filter, is you simply type in HTTPS when you visit a website. Well, the URL filters these days are much smarter than that. Even without doing SSL decryption, they can identify the very high-end URL that you happen to be visiting based on the fully qualified domain name. And of course, with SSL encryption and decryption included, these devices are able to decrypt the SSL and see the exact URL you're visiting and then decide whether you are allowed to visit that site or not. This is also a technology that we often see integrated into other devices. So if you have a proxy, very often the proxy will have URL filtering as one of its capabilities. There are very often standalone URL filters as well. And these days, a lot of the URL filtering is happening inside the firewall itself. So there could be many places where you might be able to enable or disable this URL filtering capability, but that wasn't the question. The question said, which of these would be the best choice for this requirement? Just because you have a firewall doesn't mean that it also does URL filtering. In fact, there's not every firewall in the world even knows what a URL filter is. There's not even an option for many firewalls to do that. So that becomes very difficult to be able to figure out where that can happen. And firewalls may not have a URL filtering in them, or they might. Well, that's not the best answer then. We really want to find the thing that always provides us with this capability. Would not be a WAP. The idea of being able to find information based on applications input. Well, that's not URL filtering. It's something completely different. Packet shapers, not URL filtering. Load balancing is not URL filtering. Indeed, the answer D, URL filter, is the best answer for that. That is really the challenge of what people are trying to do. Now, obviously, these days on people's networks, it's more than just URLs. It's about applications. And of course, some of the very advanced next generation firewalls out there can not only block based on a URL or URL category, they can block based on an application or what the application is doing. For example, they might allow someone to visit Twitter, either on the Twitter app that's on their device or from a browser, and they might allow people to read Twitter but not post to Twitter. And the newest kinds of firewalls can differentiate between those two very different things. So you can really get into very detailed allowances and blocking of not only applications, but what the application is doing. Very interesting to have that capability. There are so many different things that you need to know about on the Network Plus exam, probably well more than the A Plus and more than the Network Plus, probably because networking in general has so many different pieces and parts associated with it. It is enormous in what is this scope. And you'll see this if you go through the Network Plus materials. It seems almost overwhelming, but if you break them down into small pieces, you're able to get through the content much easier. You can, of course, go through all of my videos, and you could write your own notes. You could make a note of what the pictures are. You could take all of my charts and all my diagrams, and you can make your own version of them. But I've already done that for you. I've created my own set of notes that is specific to my videos. These are my N10006 Network Plus course notes. I've taken everything that's important from my videos, and I put them in this PDF file. This is, in fact, every page of the PDF file is listed here right on this screen, these tiny little thumbnails. So everything dealing with the subnetting and the proxies and the security features and the interfaces and the types of ports we need to know, the wireless settings, they are all in here. It is a big PDF file. This is the actual PDF. I'm just going to scroll through a number of the pages so you can get a feel for all of the detail that's in here. All the graphics that I created, all of the charts that I created, everything in here is available for you to use. And what I tried to do is make this something that is also affordable for you. There's so many different things you can purchase and so many different resources available out there. But this is one where hopefully you're getting what you paid for in this particular case. And for only $10, you can have access to this 15-page PDF document, everything I tried to put in there. This is not something that's designed to replace your book. It's not designed to replace videos. There are no shortcuts when it comes to certifications and training for those certifications and trying to learn all the content. But if you need something, once you've gone through the book, you've gone through your videos, and you just need something to summarize everything in one place, this is what it's here for. So if you'd like to learn more about that, you go to professormesser.com/NPCN. It becomes really handy to have all of those things there. Hopefully you will find some value with them as well. And I want to thank everyone who has supported me by purchasing those course notes. This is how we keep all of the lights on here in the studio, how we keep everything going. And I can't thank you enough for your ongoing support. Let's go to the next question. Let's keep the questions going then. Here's a question. Which of these would be true of an 802.11n network configured in legacy mode? Well, now we have to know a lot of different things. I'm already asking a lot of questions about a lot of technologies right now. So which of these particular multiple choice answers, hopefully, would be true of an 802.11n network configured in legacy mode? Would it be that 802.11g devices operate at 802.11 speeds? Would it be that all devices operate at 802.11g speeds? Would it be that 802.11 devices operate at 802.11n speeds? And 802.11g devices operate at 802.11g speeds? Only 802.11n devices would operate on the network, or would it be that 802.11n devices will not operate on this network? Well, there's quite a few to go through with this question. This is one of the challenges. In fact, I talked about the most common questions I get when people are registering, and wireless is one of those. And that's probably a good place to go because you will certainly get some questions on your exams about wireless. And this is a type of technology that comes directly from the CompTIA exam objectives. Knowing what legacy mode is and how it operates on these networks becomes pretty important at dealing with these. So you want to go through this list as well and get a feel for what these different modes are, what these different configurations might be. And of course, one of the challenges you have with wireless is there's so many different wireless standards. So make sure you spend the time really going through the wireless standards and knowing what these things can do. So if you don't know, don't Google it. Stop Googling those pieces. You should absolutely go to this view of the different answers and just choose what you think it might be in these particular cases. You need to understand exactly what these are when dealing with legacy mode. This is actually a nice thing to have, this legacy mode. I can see a number of you are Googling, by the way. I know I can't see you Googling. I can feel it. I can watch. I see the numbers when people are answering. I see how the numbers move up. And when the numbers go slowly, I know that somebody's doing Googling. So stop that. Don't do that. Pretend you're sitting there on the exam and you've gotten this question and now you have to figure it out. Try to figure out all of those different pieces of it. Let's see how we did with this one. Let's see how we did after your Googling session was complete. Well, we are a little torn. No majorities here. 46% said 802.11 devices operate at 802.11 speeds and G devices operate at G speeds. Or 40% said all devices operate at G speeds, and only single digits for any of these others. So we're sort of in that mode where it's one of those two things that we're dealing with in both of these. So which would it be? Well, first let's talk about these different 802.11 standards. One of the challenges we've had through the years is that the technologies in wireless have greatly improved over time. We've had different speeds. We've used a different set of frequencies depending on what standard you are using. You might be using 2.4 gigahertz frequencies. You might be using 5 gigahertz frequencies. It becomes a little bit of a challenge there to figure out all of these pieces. And you can see for something like 802.11b, 802.11g and n, and then solely 802.11n, what those different frequencies are and how much of those frequencies might be used for these wireless technologies. So this becomes a little more of a challenge, is now you have all of these different standards, but you also have all of these different devices that are out on the network. Some of the devices are 802.11b devices, some are 802.11g devices, some are 802.11n devices, some are AC devices. How can you get all of these devices to work together? It becomes a little more of a challenge whenever you start stepping through all of those. One of the things that you'll see with the different connection types specific to 802.11n is there's something called a high throughput mode. So let's say that with 802.11n, one of your advantages is you have much higher speeds that you can use. And if everything on your network is an 802.11n device, then you can use the highest available speeds for that particular standard. You don't have to slow anything down or make anything different because there are these older devices on your network. You have what we call a greenfield mode, which means that everything out there is now running at 802.11n, and this really gives you the best throughput when you're on an 802.11n network. One of the challenges you'll find is that there may be other devices on the network that are not 802.11n devices. So we need to create a compatibility mode for those. We call this a legacy mode so that we are able to communicate back to these older devices. And when you are running in this legacy mode, then you have this scenario where you're no longer able to get those enhanced speeds of 802.11n. And effectively, everything is going to run at those slower speeds. It moves everything down to the slower speed when you're in this legacy mode. Now, fortunately, there's also a mode with 802.11n called an 802.11n mixed mode, which gives your 802.11n devices a little bit more of a speed. It doesn't slow everything down, but your 802.11a and G devices are not going to be able to use those faster speeds. So this is one where you may be the best of both worlds, might be a hybrid mode. So you can at least have one of those things happening, at least have the 802.11 devices, the N devices going as fast as they possibly can, even though they're not at the full speed of N, but also have the other devices on your network that are not N devices able to communicate as well. So when we go back to legacy mode, we really are being very specific with what we're able to do here. A legacy mode means that not N devices operating at N speeds and G devices operating at G speeds. That would be more of a hybrid. So C in this case, the 47% of you, not actually the correct answer. The correct answer for a legacy mode means that all devices, whether it's an N device or a G device, is all going to be moved down to the lower speed to be able to do that. So if you answered B, that all devices operate at 802.11g speeds, the 39% of you got that one absolutely right with that one. So make sure you understand those standards with 802.11. 802.11 itself is very broad. For the exam objectives, I've tried to create my videos to be very specific to what they ask in the objectives. And I think if you focus all of your studies just on what's on the objectives, I think it's a little easier to figure out all the details. A lot of books out there go into a lot of detail about 802.11 that the exam objectives don't necessarily talk to. So make sure that you really focus on the objectives, and that may help you out a bit. Let's do another question. Let's keep this going. Which of these would best describe VLAN segmentation of the network? Which of these would best describe VLAN segmentation of the network? Let's see what our different options might be. Would it be that it requires a router to communicate between subnets? Would it be that it restricts communication between devices on a single subnet? Would it be that high bandwidth devices are automatically moved to their own VLAN? Would it be that internal devices use private IP addressing and NAT to communicate elsewhere? Or would it be that separate VLANs can only communicate across an 802.1q trunk? So one of these with VLAN segmentation. This is another topic that is absolutely listed in the exam objectives. You need to understand VLANs, and you need to understand VLAN segmentation. Make sure you understand what those are and how they operate, because you'll need to be able to answer questions like this one. See if you happen to know what the answer is. And if you do know, no mentioning in the chat room. Instead, go to Socrative.com, go to room name Professor Messer after you click the student login link. Now, if you're watching this on a replay, you'll notice there is no Socrative. You have to be here live to be able to participate on the Socrative Q&A. So it's the people that are online right now that are able to submit their question. But that's okay. You can still follow along with this. And in the chat room, Emma says, well, what do you mean segmentation? Well, you need to know what segmentation is to be able to answer the question. So I can't give you a hint on that one. This is a very specific term, VLAN segmentation. It's one that is very specific to making this particular answer or this particular topic one that you can answer from these different options. So this is one where you should already know. If you don't know what VLAN segmentation is, it's going to be very hard to answer the question. So maybe take a stab at it. Take a guess at what the answer could possibly be with VLAN segmentation. This is something also very commonly that shows up. I probably won't give you a hint. I'll tell you more about it in just a moment, because VLAN segmentation is a very specific thing and how it operates. Let's see how we did with VLAN segmentation. I'll click the How Do We Do button here. Well, we are all over the place, it seems. 32%, 31%, a third of us perhaps said requires a router to communicate between subnets. 28% said it restricts communication between devices on a single subnet. 22% said separate VLANs can only communicate across an 802.1q trunk. And 12% said internal devices use private IP addressing and NAT to communicate elsewhere. And only 7% said that high bandwidth devices are automatically moved to their own VLAN. But obviously, we're all over the place here. No real winner in this particular one, and well under what a majority would be. So let's talk about VLAN segmentation, because this is something that will absolutely come up in a meeting when you're talking about primarily security on the network, but it's something that's commonly used when you talk about VLANs. Whenever we talk about VLANs, these virtual local area networks, or VLANs, this is a configuration that you would configure on your switch to effectively partition your switch into different subnets. It's really more different broadcast domains, if you want to use the proper terms, because with VLANs, we're on a switch. We're talking about layer 2. We're not talking about layer 3. But one of the things that you'll find is that a VLAN and an IP subnet are almost always the same thing on a switch. They're obviously different things, but they're almost always identical to each other on a switch. You usually have one IP subnet per VLAN on a switch. It's not always that way, but it should be. That's one of the challenges with designing networks. It's not always exactly as one would hope sometimes. Whenever you get into this idea of segmenting out the network and making so that the network has different sections of the network, it may be for different reasons. This is what we mean when we talk about VLAN segmentation. We're separating out, let's say we're separating out the network by group. So you might have an HR VLAN, you might have an operation VLAN, you might have an IT VLAN, you might have an accounting VLAN, and you would put all of the people from those departments in their own VLAN. By default, this is providing at least one layer of security, because when you start separating out devices by IP subnet, obviously these devices are only going to be able to communicate with each other if there happens to be a router in between. And that's why we'll usually segment at a very high level. Usually VLAN segmentation at a minimum is between the data center and the users. That's almost always the most common VLAN segmentation that you'll run into. So you will see that there is maybe all of your users might be on one VLAN, and all of the data center might be on another. Well, why would you do that? You have to put a router in between so that people can communicate back and forth to the data center. And of course, you would have a router in between because that's the only way to communicate between IP subnets and indeed between these VLANs that we have created. These routers, though, are often not just routers, they're often firewalls as well. And that's where you really get into the value of this VLAN segmentation, because if you can separate out what people are doing, you're in really good shape. You're able to now manage the type of communication between point A and point B. We talk very often when people get into communicating to devices on the inside of your network, you want to only allow people to access the devices that are appropriate for them. You don't want to give people access to a database server if there's no reason for that person to have access to the database server. And that becomes handy, especially if you're trying to prevent some type of third-party access. If somebody hacks into your network, at least you would be able to restrict access to a particular device because now they're on a different VLAN and you can now firewall between those VLANs. At a minimum, we can do a very simple packet filtering between those VLANs, but most organizations are now putting firewalls in place so you can really protect what's on the other side of that VLAN or between VLANs. It also allows you that if somebody has some problem on the HR VLAN, that hopefully it's not going to be affecting people that are on different VLANs of your organization. So with certain kinds of problems, you can keep those problems minimized to a particular group of people. It becomes helpful to have that there as well. Whenever I start getting into VLANs, it can also be very confusing because when you start looking at these different broadcast domains, you almost have to draw it all out logically. You aren't really looking at a physical layout anymore. You're dealing with how you're designing the network. Just in the studios here, for example, I have a VLAN that we are on right now. That's my production VLAN. There's another VLAN here that I use for my security cameras because they use a lot of multicast. They're high bandwidth, and I don't want them broadcasting or multicasting onto the rest of what we're doing here. I have another VLAN for the bird feeder. For those of you that watch the pre-show at birdfeeder.live, you can see the bird feeder that's in my backyard. And it's always streaming, so it has its own VLAN for that. I have another VLAN for my house because I do this at home. So the studio network is different than the house network. So I create all these separate VLANs. Oh, and my audio is on a different VLAN. So I've really got 5 or even 6 VLANs that I have here just to be able to make all of these things happen. So I'm not really doing the segmentation for security as much as I'm doing it to keep these devices all segmented off in their own little world, and allows me to not have the cameras, for instance, conflicting with our streaming communication that we're doing right now. So if we look at the answers to this, which would best describe the VLAN segmentation of the network, requiring a router to communicate between subnets is the thing that best describes this. Now, if I really wanted to point out that this was for security, I would have probably said requires a firewall to communicate between subnets, but I think that would have tipped my hat in this particular case. I don't want to tell you that because that actually highlighted that particular answer. So I chose the one that is the most common thing, which is really to route between these subnets. The next most popular answer was to restrict communication between devices on a single subnet, and that's not what a VLAN does. Generally, there's not much restriction between devices on the same subnet. And obviously, in a VLAN, usually, if you're separating VLANs, then you're also separating IP subnets. So it would not be restricting communication between devices on a single subnet. It would be restricting devices on a different subnet entirely. Well, back to the answers here. So it would be restricting, if this would be right if it said restricts communication between devices on multiple subnets. But I said single subnets, so that would not be the correct answer in this particular case. Would it be C, high bandwidth devices automatically move to their own VLAN? No, that doesn't even happen. That's not even a thing. I just kind of made that up. So definitely not the scenario for that. Internal devices use private IP addressing and NAT to communicate elsewhere. That's not really VLAN. That's not really the issue associated with that. And separate VLANs can only communicate across an 802.1q trunk. We're not really talking about trunk in this case. Trunking is something where VLANs can communicate across switches. So you can put a set of HR devices on this switch, and a set of HR devices on another switch, and yet they can only see each other between the switches because we're using this 802.1q trunking. So it would not be the case to do that either. The only thing that really best describes VLAN segmentation of the network is that it does require a router to communicate between subnets. So if you answered A, you got that one absolutely right. Well done. So nice job on that one. VLANs is an important thing to know, and VLANs can be a little confusing as well. So don't let the VLANs throw you too much. It does become a little bit more of a challenge to keep up with all of these different things associated with a VLAN. That's a little bit more of a scenario. It is useful, by the way, in the chat room they're mentioning this, to actually create a diagram. And usually you're creating two diagrams. You're creating a physical diagram of how things are plugged in, and then you're creating a logical diagram of perhaps how your VLANs are laid out. So this is how it works there. Am I making stuff up? Nope, that's actually how it works. That is actually a real thing. In fact, you could try it yourself. If you think I'm making something up, you could try maybe running it in a lab. So you can get your own switches and you can set up a lab with everything you want to have running. You could set up and run your own packet captures. You could have your own commands that you're running. One of the challenges with doing that, of course, is you need all of the correct equipment to have that particular lab there. You need to be able to have all of the different components that are available in this particular case and running on that network. You need to have some labs that actually step you through some of these scenarios. But fortunately, all of the folks that are dealing with labs are folks like the GTS Learning Live Labs. You can find out about these at professormesser.com/netlabs. They've already got the labs set up online. You simply open a browser, you connect to the labs, and you're running on these devices. They've already got the Windows devices running. You can perform packet captures. They've already got the networks there. You can set up VLANs. You can configure all of these different components. It becomes very useful to have those there and be able to work through this. There is actually a special price as well. You have to follow my link to get this price. If you went to the GTS Learning website, it would be $159, but instead it's $99 with this special price to have access to all of these labs for this time frame. In fact, if I go to professormesser.com/netlabs, I'll give you a feel for what this looks like. The folks at GTS Learning not only have the labs, but they also have books available. So when you get the labs, you also get their book, their N10006 book. And it's one that also has sample questions in there. So that might be something to look at as well. And I think you'll find that if you go through and look at all these labs, they even have a free trial here at the bottom. Just scroll down to the bottom. You can try it yourself. Maybe this is something that would might work for you or might not. The only way to know is if you gave it a shot. So they can have free samples there that you can try out and see if these labs might be something that work for you. And I want to thank the folks at GTS Learning for their support as well. I would not be able to go through and do these labs without their help and having that there. It's just another one of those things that we always like to work through. Well, there's so much in my list here. I think I've got another question here, but I'm showing a blank on my screen. So I'm going to make sure I have the next question available to you. Because I think I've got, here's the question. In fact, I'm not even going to show it on my screen. We're just going to have it on the Socrative side, and you'll see it pop up on this side that says, which of these would be the best use of an OTDR? Maybe you know which of these would be the best use of an OTDR. Well, you have to know what an OTDR is, I guess, to know what the answer is, because the answers are test a 1000 base T-link for signal loss, view a wire map, determine dB loss across a network run, calculate near-end crosstalk, or identify an invalid ARP response. One of these would be the best use of an OTDR. Now, if you don't know what an OTDR is, don't Google OTDR. You need to take a stab. You take a guess at that and understanding what an OTDR is. Maybe you do know what an OTDR is, but you have to be able to look at all of these answers and evaluate if this is something that you really can do and would be the best use of an OTDR. Maybe you do know. And if you do know, you can go to Socrative.com to the click the student login and go to room Professor Messer, PROFESSORMESSER, and you'd be able to do that. This is one you will need to know this definitely for your exam. The topic of OTDR is something that comes directly from the CompTIA exam objectives. If you don't have those objectives, by the way, you need to get these. Should be your number one source for studying, is knowing these objectives. You can always go to professormesser.com/objectives or go to the Google machine and type in CompTIA exam objectives. It will take you right to those. And you need the ones, obviously, for the N10006 exam, being able to work through those. Which one of these would be the best use of an OTDR? I'm going to give you a couple more seconds. We'll get a few more folks answering in this. You finished your Googling. You now know what an OTDR is, and actually it may not even help you then. Even if you know what it is, you have to understand what it does. So let's see how we did. Well, 50% said determine the dB loss over a network run. 31% said test 1,000 base T-link for signal loss. And then we've got single digits for everything else, viewing a wire map, calculating near and crosstalk, or identifying an invalid ARP response. So which one of these would it be then? Well, first we have to know, what in the world is an OTDR? Well, it's like a TDR, except it has an O at the beginning. It doesn't help very much, does it? TDR is a time domain reflectometer, which is why we call it a TDR. Nobody likes to call it. Hey, have you seen the time domain reflectometer around here anywhere? And when you put an O in the front of it, it becomes an optical time domain reflectometer. Optical being for fiber, the TDR being for copper. So those are the primary differences. Why we just don't say the copper TDR and the fiber TDR? Well, because we don't know. We just aren't smart enough. We have to call it the fancy name. We have to call it the time domain reflectometer and the optical time domain reflectometer. These are not easy devices, by the way, just to pick up and use. It does take a good bit of training to be able to connect up these devices, understand how to use them, and then perhaps more importantly, interpret the results. They're actually very easy devices to use. They usually have a touch screen like this one does and some buttons, and you say go, and it goes. And the problem is it gives you results. It gives you numbers on the screen, and now you have to figure out, what does that mean? Is that good or is that not good? It becomes a little bit more of a challenge to have that there. But these are very useful devices to have if you're having problems with a physical layer. If you're trying to make sure that your copper is good, you're trying to make sure that the fiber is good, there's no problems, there's no cuts, there's no splits, there's no problem getting the signal from one end to the other. This is a great way to verify that all of your cables are working and all of your fibers are working as you would expect. And that is the primary use of a TDR and an OTDR. Well, in this particular case, with this particular answer, with this particular question, I asked you about the best use of an OTDR. So I'm very specific with the OTDR. This is an optical time domain reflectometer. So everything that's listed here in this answer is dealing with copper except for one of these. So for example, we'll take some of the lowest numbers first. View a wire map. A wire map would only be done on a copper connection. You're getting a mapping of the wires. There's no optical there. There's no fiber. It's not a fiber map, it's a wire map. Well, that's definitely copper, so that's not an optical time domain reflectometer. If we look at identifying an invalid ARP response, well, I wouldn't see ARP responses just on a wire. I need to have a packet capture. I need to be able to understand the protocols going over the wire. That's not the use. That's something at least layer 2 and up. So we're really wanting to know more about protocols running across the network. So it's definitely not the right answer there. That would not be anything we would see on an OTDR. 8% said calculate near and crosstalk. Near and crosstalk is a problem you only find on copper wires. It's not something you ever see on fiber because the light doesn't leak over to the other side to create crosstalk. It's only on copper in that scenario. And testing a 1000 base T link for signal loss, you have to know that 1000 base T is copper Ethernet connection, gigabit Ethernet over copper, not gigabit Ethernet over fiber. So it's not really a trick question, but you have to know what those different terms are. And if we determine dB loss over network run, that's the only thing left. And in fact, it's one of the most common things to use an OTDR for, is understanding how much light are we losing between point A and point B. So determining dB loss over network run would be 52%. So in the chat room, they say, what if we just said TDR? Well, if we said TDR, it would apply to A, it would apply to B, it would apply to C, it would apply to D, would not apply to E. E is really for protocol analyzer. So if we were just saying a TDR, it could be any of those. In fact, there's not a best answer in that case because a TDR would do all of these extremely well. But this question obviously was for an OTDR. So in the chat room, they're calling trick question on me, which is fair enough. It's not a trick question. But if you think it is, that means maybe you know some topics that you need to study for next time. And speaking of studying and having all of this here, if you already have your Network Plus certification and you're accumulating continuing education credits, then you want to be able to use the term OTDR, and you want to go to the top or the bottom of the Professor Messer website. There's a Contact Us link, and in that Contact Us link, you want to put your name, you want to put your email address, you want to specify that this is the November 2016 study group, and you want to put the special code word of OTDR. You can do this whether you're watching live or whether you're watching on the replay. You can do this for any of my study groups. You go back in time and watch all of them and submit them for continuing education units. Of course, CompTIA limits the total number of continuing education units that you can accumulate from a webinar-based event. So you can't get all of the CEUs that you would need to renew, but you can get a nice little chunk of them from my continuing education offerings on my study groups. That may be something for you to be able to do as well. Whenever I start getting into the specifics of this exam, as I mentioned, you want to be sure that you have the exam objectives. I mentioned this earlier. Make sure you do it. People are coming into my website all the time and saying, I didn't pass my exam. They asked me questions I was not expecting on topics I've never heard of. And I said, well, what topic was it? They told me. And I said, well, that's in the exam objectives. And they said, what are you talking about? I don't know exam objectives. I've never heard of that. The exam objectives are the most comprehensive set that tells you everything you would ever need to know about what's going to be on the exam. People are often asking me, what do I need to learn for my exam? This is it. CompTIA tells you everything you need to learn. In fact, if you know everything that is in these exam objectives, you will easily pass your exam. I'll just tell you that right off the gate. Very easy to have that there. Make sure you know those pieces and know that those exam objectives are there. They can be the best thing available for you. Well, I do one of these study groups every month, by the way. So if you are someone who would like to visit the website and watch one of these live, the next Network Plus study group is going to be in December, on December the 14th. I have an A Plus study group on December the 7th. I have a Security Plus study group on December the 21st. And of course, if you're ever wondering, when is the next live event? You can always go to professormesser.com/calendar or simply click the calendar link at the top of my website, and I'll be able to tell you exactly when that event is going to be. Well, we've gone through, can you believe, another hour of these. And of course, if you want to follow what we do throughout the month, you can follow us on all of the social media that's out there. Simply type in professormesser.com/Twitter/YouTube/Facebook/Instagram/whatever it is, and hopefully you'll find me there at that particular social networking link. Don't forget about my course notes. You can find out more about those at professormesser.com/NPCN, Network Plus Course Notes. That's what that stands for. Of course, you also have options to see the GTS Learning Net Labs and get their free hour of Net Labs. I think it's an hour they give you at professormesser.com/netlabs. And don't forget, I do these every month. And maybe I'll add some other things in here too. I've been thinking about adding some new live events. And if you ever want to know what's going on, you can always find us at professormesser.com/calendar. Well, that brings us to the end of the formal study group. I usually stick around afterwards. I'll open up the phone lines. You can call in. You can ask questions in the chat room. And we talk about, well, darn near anything dealing with technology, anything that we might want to do. So make sure you stick around for that if you're watching live or you're watching the replay. That might be something fun to do as well. And if you can't, I can appreciate that as well. Want to appreciate you being here for the first hour and spending some time answering questions with me. And I want to thank you for doing that. We will see you next time on the Professor Messer Study Group. Thanks, everyone. Now the after show. Now we don't have to talk about anything specific to Network Plus if we don't want to, but we certainly could. In the chat room, they're saying, will I be doing similar thing for CCNA? That's the Cisco Certified Network Administrator. And I don't have anything specific to announce regarding CCNA. I'd love to do tons of Cisco, myself. It's all about time, I guess, in having those there. So I really don't have anything that I can tell you regarding CCNA at the moment, but I would love to do some. I think that would be fun. Let's open up the phone lines. Whether you want to call in or not is completely up to you. It would be good if I had this ready to go on my side, wouldn't it? Let's log in and go to my shows and go to start a show, host a show. Yes, I have an amateur radio license as well. That's correct. You can see some of the equipment. Can you even see it? Yeah, there's a transceiver that's right. It's right there. It's right next to the Rubik's Cube. There's a transceiver. HF transceiver right there. Let's start a show. Let's call into the show, shall we? Through Skype. I know it's not Skype. It's an inside joke. And it wants me to do a thing. I am calling and calling.
Please
and
enter your show number
my show number. And I type this in.
Enter your 6-digit PIN number.
That's redundant. I say that every week, and it never gets old.
Host. You are now in the host room and can
Am
manage
I?
your callers.
Well, sure I can. So I'm calling into my host room just as you can call in to my host room. And if you'd like to call in, you don't have to. If you'd like to, there's the number, 855-785-7545, a toll-free number in the United States. If you're calling on Skype, it is a free Skype number as well. Free Skype at +1 855-785-RJ45. That's what that is. My call sign is AG4DX, Alpha Golf 4 Delta X-Ray. And that was the random one I got. That is not one that I signed up for. It's a AG4DX. For those not amateur radio people, the DX is sort of a nice term to have associated with your call sign because it refers to communicating over distances, long distances, DX. And so the AG4DX was one that I kind of liked getting just randomly. I didn't have to submit anything for doing that, which was kind of nice. So I got a little spoiled. And for those also not familiar, in the United States, the call sign is available. You can submit a request to the FCC to have that call sign assigned to you. And so I didn't have to do that, but I got a DX call sign anyway. So I love that call sign. We do have some people calling in on the phones. So let's go. Oh, I like WB5 UPS in the chat room. Ask if you work for UPS. That's great. You should now go work for UPS so that you could say, yeah, I can work for you. I just like UPS. UPS can bring me things. Let's go to the 904 area code somewhere here in North Florida. Are you there, caller? What's your name?
I am. I'm Heath. How you doing,
Hey,
Professor?
Heath. Welcome. Thanks. What can we do for you?
I'm coming up on a position, security position, a junior IT security analyst.
Nice.
My only experience is through school. What can you give me any, what can I expect from this position? What kind of things will I be doing?
It's interesting. We're seeing more people hiring these junior positions into a security role that don't necessarily have an enormous networking background these days. And I think it's a nice thing that companies are doing to be able to get people into security without necessarily pulling things away from the networking side. And one thing that I tell people, especially about security, is that a ton of network security, a ton of IT security, and I'm talking specifically about a kind of a corporate or an enterprise IT security role, is obviously different than somebody who's doing security for writing applications more on the computer science side. So when I talk about this, I'm really talking about the folks that are protecting the network security of your environment, is that you need to have...
That would be the side that I'm on.
Oh, perfect. So this is one where you need to have the strongest foundation you can in networking, which is kind of odd because it's a security role. But what you're going to find is in IT security, a huge part of what you're doing is network related, whether it is configuring firewalls between VLANs, like we mentioned in the study group today, and you have to understand where these subnets are and how your VLANs are configured. If you're installing firewalls, you're usually doing them in pairs. There's redundancy, and there is redundant protocols that are used to communicate between all of these devices. And are you setting them up to move from one IP address to the other when they fail over because they're running in a layer 3 redundancy? Maybe you're running in a layer 2 redundancy where you're simply sending hello messages back and forth between them. How do you configure those with the existing switches that are on your network? Do you plug them directly into the wide area network? And if you do, what routing protocols are you going to use through that firewall? You can already see there's such a huge networking component to all of these different security devices, and they all work differently to be able to do that.
When I got I did get my associate's degree in computer networking with my minor in security.
Great.
And that's kind of what I'm going off of. That's the experience that I have.
That's a great
I'm
foundation.
actually pursuing my bachelor's now, so.
That is a great foundation for getting into security. I came from network security. I worked for, well, it started with Network General, and Network General was acquired by Network Associates. So that is the company that ultimately was McAfee. Really, it was McAfee and then turned into Network Associates and turned back into McAfee. But I got to work with all of the firewalls, all of the antivirus technologies, all of the centralized gateways, all of the proxies, everything dealing with security, and then went to a next generation firewall company where I worked with those technologies. And having that basic understanding, because I came from a protocol analysis background, having the understanding of how every protocol works across the network and understanding all of those OSI layers and how they interoperate between the protocols was incredibly valuable from a security perspective, because all of those security devices are working at that level, obviously. And being able to implement a next generation firewall is different than implementing a proxy, which is also different than implementing some type of antivirus solution on the network. And you have to know what those differences are and then ultimately be able to install them into an existing environment. So I think that's a good combination for you. Now, one of the challenges you have, of course, and this is a challenge for anybody who's going into any role out of school, is that you have your knowledge you've gained and your formal degree or education that you've created. Maybe there is some experience that you've gotten somewhere else that you can apply to this, and then there might be certifications that you can add on top of this. None of those things replaces the other. And I see this as something, I just ran across a message on Reddit the other day that it drives me crazy when I see this, because people will say, well, your certifications don't replace any type of experience you have. Well, no, they don't, but nobody ever said they did. I don't know. It's this odd straw man that gets thrown out. Well, does it replace your? No, of course. Well, no one has ever said that it does. They have their own value, though. A certification has a value associated with it. The formal training that you have gotten, your education, has a value associated with it. And of course, the experience you might have working in a role that uses these things also has a value. All of these things work together, and you need to be able to create the right mix of those things for you so that when you walk in the door to an interview, you've got at least the best face that you can put on to the person who's hiring. Now, you also have to know in these places that are hiring, what type of person are they looking for? If they're hiring a junior person, do they really care if you have experience or not? They might not. And that might be a good question to ask them in the interview.
They were telling in the job description, it does say training available if needed.
Okay. And one of the things that is good is when somebody writes a good job description, you'll be able to tell before you walk in the door what they're really looking for. But one thing I always recommend people to do is ask them when you're in the room. Ask them, well, you know, I've got this experience for that I've done. I've got this formal education and I've got these certifications, or I've got these other things I'm working on. Now you're hiring this junior role, but as you can see, I've not worked in that particular role before. Is that okay? Is that something that works for you? You might as well lay it on the table. It's an elephant that's sitting in the middle of the room. Why not ask, or ask it in a different way? Ask the person who's hiring, what are you looking for? Who is the best person walking in here for this type of role? And what are you finding? And what type of people have you hired in the past and what's worked for you? And see if they can give you a feel for the type of person they're trying to hire. If you don't get this role the first time through, and they say, well, I'm sorry, we went with someone else, you at least now know what that person is hiring for. And you can go out and say, well, they needed more of this. I'm going to go get some more of that so that I can walk in the door the next time and get that particular job. People who are hiring would love to tell you. And I will tell you, based on the security professionals that I've been around at the CIO level or the CISO level, which is the Central Information Security Officer of an organization or an IT officer of the organization, it's really, really hard to get very good security people. There is a lot of people looking for security people, and it's hard to find them. So if you can get the perfect combination for what someone's looking for, you're going to be doing well in that interview.
Okay, fantastic.
Well, hopefully that gives you at least some insight, and maybe that will, when you walk in the door, ask as many questions as possible. Have those questions lined up. We were talking about asking those questions in our chat room on the Professor Messer website the other day, and someone was saying, what do I even ask? Well, you ask what you want to know. How's the hiring process been? What are you finding? What are you looking for? What would be the best role here? Are there other things that are going on and other projects going on that's going to be important for this role? Find out what's really driving this particular hire, because companies just don't hire because they like people. They hire because they have a need. What is the need they're trying to fill? And you can get a lot of great intel that way. I also really recommend for people, since we're talking about hiring, make sure you go to some of these user group meetings in your area and meet these people before you walk in the room on an interview. That also helps. And if you happen to know someone else in the organization, that really helps. People like to hire people that they know already, or people that they trust, or people that have a relationship in the organization, much better than if you came out from the outside, you knew nobody on the inside. We're human beings, and it always helps if you have that relationship in place.
Okay. I really appreciate your help.
Thanks, Heath. Good luck. Let us know how it goes.
Will do.
This is something I always mention when people are hiring or they're trying to plan to have the right face when they walk in the door. It's never one thing. It's never just one thing. It's a combination of things. It's how you carry yourself. It's the experiences you have. I have had, my last big role was with this next generation firewall company, and all of those things I'd done in the past with security weren't as important as one particular thing they were looking for. And I really had to fight for that job and say, no, I really can do that. And here's how I can fit into that. And I don't know if you're right for us. I don't know if that's going to work. And I really had to use other people I knew to talk to them internally and say, no, he really does know what he might actually be able to do this job. You might want to be able to work through that. Let's go back to the 619 area code. Has been very patient on the phone. Thanks for holding. What's your name?
Hey, Professor Messer. This is Tristan Roberts. I just want to start out by saying I got A+, Net+, and Sec+ certified back in 2014.
Nice.
And I used your training videos as a primary resource. They're invaluable, and I thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome, and congratulations.
Thanks a lot. So my question is, I'm sort of in a position now to where I try to help people go through the same process that I went through.
Nice.
So my question to you would be, if there were 2 or 3 things that you would recommend any person that's going to take any, not just the Net+ exam, but any of these CompTIA exams, what would be the 2 or 3 main things that you would recommend that any person do, no matter your knowledge level?
The first thing, and the thing that I mention every month, and it never ceases to frustrate me in some level, is that people go into these exams that they are paying really a lot of money for, and they don't even understand the questions that are going to be asked of them. They don't understand the topics of the questions that are going to be asked of them because they've never downloaded and read through the exam objectives. And I tell people, get the exam objectives, and if you have to, print them out and use a pen or pencil and cross through the things you know and highlight the things you don't. It can be one of the most valuable study materials that you have before you go through your book, before you go through videos, before you do Q&A. Read every bit of those exam objectives and know exactly what's going to be asked of you. And before you walk in your exam, go through them again. They're a great checklist. You can check off and see if there's anything you missed or anything you don't know really well, so that you, before you walk in the door, will have that knowledge in your brain, or at least understand the places that maybe you're not as strong as you could be. The other thing I always mention with these exams is, and it's sort of a problem with certification exams in general, it doesn't matter whose you take, is that it's a test, and most of it is multiple choice, and very little of it is hands-on. But what I found is the more hands-on you do, the more it gets embedded into your brain. And the Network Plus is really no different. Security Plus is the same. A Plus is the same. If you can sit at the command line and perform these commands, or you can put together an IPsec tunnel between two devices, it solidifies it in your brain, the process, the terminology. You understand what it took to get it running. And perhaps more importantly, when it doesn't work, you have to troubleshoot it. And I think when something isn't working right or you get something wrong, that's when you learn how to do things properly. So if you can make a mistake in something like a lab where it doesn't matter, there's no time constraints on you, there's no money lost, and you can go through creating your own IPsec tunnel and turning on the tunneling mode and being able to understand the traffic going through, that really helps a lot when you're working through a Network Plus exam or Security Plus exam or Cisco exam or any of the other exams that you'll find out there. Having that hands-on can be very, very valuable to you. And the third thing I usually will tell people is once you go through, get a good book, get a couple of good books. Books have a different voice. Some books will speak to you better than others. So find an author you really like and use their book. And I often tell people, if you can, use two books because you'll find different authors explain things in different ways. Some of them you get better than the others. I also tell people go through some videos. It could be mine or someone else's, because viewing it in a video, you learn differently than reading it in a book, even if it's the same content. And I think those two things work together very nicely. And thirdly, get some good Q&A. Get some questions and answers, some sample questions that can help see if you understand the things that you learned. And hopefully that will direct you down the road of understanding what you don't know well enough. Those are the top three in my mind, that if you get those three things together, you'll be best positioned for passing whatever exam it is, whether it's from Microsoft or CompTIA or Cisco or anybody else. You've now gone through that process and put all of the right things together to have the best possible chance for passing on the other side.
Thank you, Professor Messer. I appreciate all the advice, and I appreciate you helping me get through these courses a couple of years ago.
Absolutely. My pleasure, and good luck with the training that you're doing. I think that's great.
Thanks.
Take care. There's so much content to go through for Network Plus. It's a very overwhelming set of topics, especially for people that have never been in networking before. So I think breaking them up into chunks, taking them slowly, and passing them through is a really great way to do it. Let's go to the 727 area code. Are you there, caller? What's your name?
Yes. Hey, my name is Gentian.
Hey, thanks for calling.
Hey, I've got a question because right now I've got my Network Plus and Security Plus, and I'm starting towards getting my bachelor's in computer science.
Nice.
I've been looking at the DoD directive, the 8570, and it has the Network Plus and Security Plus in there, but it kind of drops off CompTIA after the advanced security practitioner.
Right.
And I was wondering if there's anything you can recommend, because I don't know much more about the other certification tracks, and if you could recommend anything for the future after the advanced security practitioner, if you know any about the DoD directive.
I do. Most people who are not dealing with the U.S. federal government have no idea these directives even exist. But what the Department of Defense has done is they have created different categories of knowledge you should have at a bare minimum to be put into a particular role in their organization. And almost all of the IT-related roles within the Department of Defense and the people who are contractors for the Department of Defense, so now we're talking about a very large grouping of people, generally have to have at least a Security Plus certification, and there's a number of equivalents that are listed in these here as well, but Security Plus is probably one of the more popular ones. And so I will have a lot of people coming to my site and starting with Security Plus that have really no IT experience whatsoever, and that's their first exam. Interestingly enough, when I started taking the CompTIA certification exams, that's the one I started with too. because I was with a security company. That's the one I started with security-wise. So you'll often see people starting with Security Plus. If you look at the list that the Department of Defense has created, you can go in a lot of different directions. And if you're really wanting to stay in a security role, as you mentioned, I think CASP is the higher level security certification from CompTIA. But what I find is the ISC squared series of security certifications tends to have a little more recognition in the security industry. And ultimately, the CISSP is what we have traditionally through the years considered to be the gold standard in security certifications. It's not the only security certification you should have. There's a lot of great certifications you can get from other companies, but generally when you get to CISSP, you've got the broadest knowledge of security that you need, and it also requires that you have some experience in the industry. And then where you usually go from there is with manufacturer-specific certifications. So if you have Cisco firewalls, you generally get a Cisco security certification. If you have Palo Alto Networks firewalls, you usually get the Palo Alto Network certification. If you have Checkpoint, you usually get Checkpoint, et cetera, et cetera. So generally, that's where you go, is you move up to kind of the CISSP level, and then you jump into the manufacturer-specific ones. And probably the manufacturer that has the broadest scope in IT is probably Cisco. I mean, they've got the footprint. They've got the basics of networking. They've got a good, a relatively decent security play currently. It's not the best that's out there, but it's very popular. So a lot of people have their firewalls and their security devices in the network. So if you're moving up or you're looking to get more of a security knowledge, that's where I would look, is to that CISSP and to the manufacturers to know where you should go from there. Now, you had mentioned also having a degree in computer science, which generally is a different realm of computing. It's more of the development engineering side and programming side, and IT is kind of the other section of it. And generally, those two sections don't meet a lot. But I can recognize, obviously, if you're dealing with the federal government, it doesn't matter. You do whatever they tell you to do, and that's the certification that you get, whether it makes sense or not. And I can appreciate that as well.
Yes, because I noticed in a lot of the job listings, they were asking for a computer science degree and then the certification.
There's sometimes no rhyme or reason, although I will tell you, if you have a solid understanding of networking and security, I think you're a better programmer. I think if you are programming without any knowledge of when you write to the API that sends that traffic out over the network and you just have no idea what the API is doing, you're just writing there and off it goes, and people are saying your application isn't working well, now you've got a missing link there. You've got a gap in your knowledge. And I think the more you know about networks in general, the better you're going to be at any part of IT myself.
Okay. All right. Thank you for the information.
Good luck with that, and let us know how it goes.
All right. All right. Thank you, because I've been trying to get more focused, because I started, and actually I had one more question before I let you go, because I started with IT while I was in high school, and then after I graduated, I went into to get my bachelor's in computer science.
Nice.
And I was wondering, I worked for 3 years while I was in high school, and towards the beginning of college, I worked as an IT admin for a small office, under 10 hosts, under 10 employees. Is that seen as experience, or how is that seen by bigger corporations?
That is absolutely experience, because it's not just you being able to work, even though it's a smaller environment, certainly not as big as other places you might run into, but anytime you're in a work environment where it's not just the knowledge you have with the computers and the networks and the programs, but it's also you came to work, you were able to solve problems, you were able to implement applications and projects that you were working on. All of these things are what the employer is looking for. They're not looking necessarily to see how smart you are. They're looking to see if you're someone who can take a problem and solve the problem. And so you should be able, from your experience, 3 years is a long time in any role, you should be able to list out.
Yeah, it was 3 years of part-time work as
Still.
an IT admin. Since it was a small office, they only needed a part-time IT admin position.
So there's got to be projects that you worked on from beginning to end in those environments. You implemented a backup strategy. You connected to their Amazon cloud to be able to run a particular application. You set up an IPsec tunnel to a third party so that you could communicate securely to a business partner. You implemented an SSL VPN so that people could connect to the corporate network or the organization's network when they were at home. All of those things are valuable projects, and the fact that you have some experience doing that is going to be valuable for another employer to know, oh, he's gone through this before. What he doesn't know, we can teach him, but he's already got some of that knowledge of what it takes to accomplish and solve these problems.
All right. Thank you for the information. Thank you for the help.
And good luck.
Have a good day.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you.
That's a lot to go through. Don't ever dismiss anything practical. What you think may not even be important to consider may be exactly what some employers are looking for. So don't ever dismiss in your mind that some of the things you've done perhaps weren't good enough to share, because someone who's hiring is they've got a puzzle and they've got pieces of the puzzle that they're missing and they need to fill in the pieces. Now, some of the pieces are difficult to cover completely. You're not often going to find one person that covers all of the empty pieces of the puzzle. But what you're trying to find is somebody who fits the best. And in certain organizations, they need someone who fits on this part of the puzzle. And other organizations are looking for a different kind of person. So it's not always knowledge. It's not always personality. It's not always experience. It's always a combination of things. Can they fit you or mold you into a way that will fit into their open pieces of their puzzle? That's what they're trying to do. And that's why I always tell people, and I mentioned already today, when you're applying for jobs, it's always good to know somebody who's already there. Companies spend a lot of time and money. For those of you that haven't worked in a large organization before, there's almost always a bonus that people in the company get if they recommend somebody who is then hired. It is a referral bonus that these companies have, because these companies realize if you hire your friends, they are more likely to come in, work in an organization, be productive, and stay. You tend to work with people you like. So if you can hire the people you like, the better the work environment's going to be for everybody. And that's why they focus on that. If you know someone in an organization, they're going to be more than happy to refer you, because not only if you get hired, you're going to have a job, but if you stay there for 3 or 6 months or whatever their time frame is, that person also gets a bonus. They get some money put into their paycheck after that 6-month period of you being there and working for the organization. So make sure you know the people that are in these organizations. If you don't know them, you need to go to events where they are. You need to go to a Microsoft user group. You need to go to a Cisco user group. You need to go to a security user group. If there is a company that is doing something in your environment, let's say Cisco's doing a seminar in your area, in your neck of the woods, and that seminar is on security, you need to sign up and go to that seminar. Not necessarily to see the systems engineer at the front of the place going through PowerPoint slides and demonstrating the product, but you want to meet the people who are also there, because those are the security people that work in the companies that are in your geographical area. This is one where it becomes pretty important that networking, I don't mean computer networking, but people networking becomes really important, because people like to hire people they know and people they trust. And the more people you know and the more people you trust, the better off you're going to be. It gives you an opportunity also, by the way, to ask questions of these people. And you can tell them, well, I'm here, I'm learning more about the Cisco. I'm also looking to meet people. Good to meet you as well. I see you work at, look at your name tag. I see you work at XYZ company. You guys, are you hiring people for your security roles? What type of people do you look for in your organization to hire into those roles? Who should I talk to see if that's something that might fit for what I am doing? You might as well ask. It doesn't hurt to ask. It's nice to be able to meet those people. And if they see you over and over and over again, then they'll trust you a lot better when it comes time to hiring. That was one of my biggest challenges in my last role. I moved to a company that I didn't know anybody. someone I knew had just been hired, and it was my only person I knew in the whole place. And every company I'd gone to prior to that, I had known many people inside that organization, and I really had to fight, and had my friend had to fight to get me into that role. Those are the things you're going to have to run into. So you need to be able to, it's the ground game. You need to be able to not only know your stuff technically, you need to be ready to go with the people that you know in these organizations. It becomes pretty darn important. It is hard to find jobs. In the chat room, people are talking about the economy, the difficulty it is to find these positions, and it is a challenge. And that's why you need to take advantage of every opportunity available, every advantage you have. And that's why I mentioned to people that piece that they might be missing. You know, they might have a great resume, but they don't know anybody. They've never met anybody in these organizations. You need to go meet them. There's undoubtedly in your geographical area trade shows. There are companies that are doing seminars. There are user groups, which are great places to meet people. All of those become very valuable networking environments. Make sure you take advantage of those. A lot of companies these days are also doing more lunches. They're doing more after dinner drinks kind of scenarios. Those are great places to meet people because it's much more casual. That's what I like to do is break through those and be able to work with them. I think that's the one where it's almost harder for us. Technical people, we don't like people. That's why we like computers, right? That's why I prefer working with a router than working with a manager. But you do have to start meeting these folks and knowing who's out there, because that's going to give you really the best opportunity walking in the door. They know who you are, and that may be your opportunity to really get that position and being able to break through that. And you're right, in the chat room, it's hard to get that first job in IT. My first job that was technical was one that I worked in college. I worked for the computing center in college. And it was a mainframe environment and supercomputer environment at that time. But many colleges have computer labs. They have IT departments that take interns from the college. They love taking interns from the college. They teach them. You now are in the IT department for the university or the college. Now you get to go to different places, see the type of equipment they're using, be able to work on those. They love to get interns because you're very inexpensive and very easy to use labor. So try to see if they're hiring in your IT department of your school. You may not even realize they're doing that, and they absolutely are. Some of the larger departments of the school also have their own IT departments. So you can also look around for that as well. Sometimes they take people who are in an IT role or IT type of degree program, but it doesn't always work that way. So make sure you find out from them as well. That's a great place to get some practical experience and work through those. And I worked late nights. I worked every weekend. I had the weekend shift. So I would come in at 7 in the morning on a Saturday, 7 in the morning on a Sunday. And I would work till 4 or 3 or 7, depending on what the scenario was on that particular weekend. If it was a holiday, I worked the holidays. I worked many Thanksgivings. I worked many Christmases in that basement. Had a little window, and I made sure everything just stayed up and running for those scenarios. That is where you really do learn quite a bit, not just about the job, but about the whole experience in general. I think it becomes very useful. Yeah, I agree. I used to be a people person too, and then people ruin that for you. You kind of have to get past that, don't you? You have to really stick with the whole people person side of things to be able to do that. Now we get to figure this out. Now, obviously in the United States, you'll notice today I'm neither wearing red nor blue because right now there will be a transition happening in the United States of leadership, but in the big scheme of things, I don't see things changing that much as it deals with IT. So we're still going to have, if anything, we might see some growth or some changes in what different organizations are doing. Now that the decision has been made, a lot of organizations were holding off on what they were planning to do. Well, now organizations are going to continue. Now they're going to say, okay, now we can start hiring. Now we know what's going to happen. We'll hire people for the things we're trying to do. It would really didn't matter who was going to win the presidential election in the United States. They said, well, if it's A, we're going to go here. If it's B, we're going to go here. Well, now they at least know what's going to happen. So organizations are now going to implement, or they're going to start with this hiring. So you may notice people were holding off a bit I'm expecting people now to now continue down the road with these projects they've got going on. Usually they are hiring based on the projects that are happening. If they're expanding into other parts of the country, if they're expanding to other parts of the world, if they're trying to get different projects going internal within their organization, this is the time to do it. So this may be a good time for interviewing. Put out your feelers and see what's out there. You may be able to find some things you weren't expecting because suddenly companies are going through with what they wanted to do. I think we're seeing some of that already, even today, in this view of things. Well, that brings us probably to the end of the study group. This was a big one today, and quite honestly, I stayed up a little late watching the elections come in. Why did I schedule a live event the day after there was something going on until 3 a.m? I don't know, but here we are anyway. As I mentioned, we have another study group next week at this same time. It's our Security Plus study group. And of course, all of my study groups are archived online. You can always go back and see where all of those happen to be and have those pieces there. It becomes pretty important whenever you want to know what did he go through on that last one. They're always there and available for you to watch on the replay. No problems there. I want to thank everybody for attending. Thanks for answering the questions. Wouldn't be able to have the study group if you weren't here. Thank you for calling in with the questions that you had. And of course, you can always go into the chat room 24/7 on the Professor Messer website, and the Contact Us link on the website comes directly to me. So if there's ever a question you have, feel free to reach out. I'm more than happy to answer any of the emails you may be sending to me. Well, that brings us to the end of the study group. Thank you for attending. We'll see you next month on the study group.